Okay, let's get ready to rumble. We are on page Yud Amud Bet. If you're following in the art scroll, that is 10b2. Approximately 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 lines from the bottom. Tana, which means we learned in a Mishnah. Okay? Everyone, you following in Hebrew or English? You with us? Mm-hmm. Okay. B'matnita Tana. It was taught to us. Every time we see, there's a difference between a Braita and a Mishnah and the way that we describe it. So over here we're being taught that this was learned in a Braita. Al tafsiu psiya gasa. When Yosef was telling his brothers to go, what did he tell them to do to make sure that they did do or didn't do? Please don't take, he said, large steps where you're kind of, almost making a very wide stride. Why? What was he worried about? That it's almost like that would be a danger if they were taking these very wide steps. Ve'achnisu hama la'ir, and through that you will make sure to come to the city while the sun is still there. So the reason why they would have wanted to do so was to, so to speak, make it to the city before nightfall. But Yosef was telling them, don't do it. It's going to be a problem. Okay? Now, we'll see exactly what is the problem of why taking a large step is a problem. The Gemara then continues. And what does the Gemara say? Al tafsiu psiya gasa, the Amar Mar, why did he tell them not to walk with the large steps? Sounds like it's a very good reason. You get there while it's still sunshine outside. The Amar Mar, because we were taught, our rabbi taught us, psiya gasa, a large step notelet, it takes echad mechamesh me'od me'or enav shel adam. It takes away a 500th of the light in a person's eyes. What exactly does that mean? We'll have to figure it out. 1/500th of a person's eyes. That would mean that every Olympic runner should be blind, right? All he's taking or she's taking is very large steps, and each time it takes away 1/500th of the light of their eyes. Ve'achnisu hama la'ir, and you'll come with the city in. Ve'achnisu hama la'ir, you will come with the sun into the city. Kid Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, like the Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav that taught the Amar Yehuda Amarav leolam yetzeh adam chitov. A person should always leave when he's trying to go on a road. He's trying to go on a derech. He should always go b'chitov in a way that's good. Yikanes b'kitov, and he should come in b'kitov also in a way that's good. So, what does it mean, kitov and kitov? The Gemara that continues and says, Shneimar, haboker or, the morning was light, ve'anashim shulahu, and the men were sent. Now, if you remember, a lot of times you have to look at the side of the pasuk. Look at the right. Haboker or ve'anashim shulahu hema hamoreim. So the people were sent. The morning came, and the people were sent, them and their donkeys. Okay. Then the Gemara says, okay. So therefore, what does that have to do with anything? Amar Yehuda Amar Rabbi Hiya. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Hiya. Oh, wait a second. Sorry. Let's read Rashi. Rashi says, "Ve'achnisu hama la'ir." If you look to the left, right to the left of where we are in Rashi. Kishatem lanim v'shochavim baderech v'ayarot, when you're going to go to sleep and lie down on the way in the cities, hachnisu la'ir ba'od shacham hazorachat. Come into the city when the light is still shining. Yatzeh adam b'chitov sheyamtim ad she'or. He should wait until the sun is shining. Vayar Elohim et haor kitov. So in each one of these cases, Yosef was communicating to them that there's a correct and a right time and a right way in which to travel. And what is the right way in which to travel? The right way to travel, to leave and to arrive, is with the sun. You see, because he told them, you should come in with the sun. But also you see that when he sent the people, when did Yosef send them? Haboker or the sun, the moon, the morning was light, and ha'anashim shulchu, and the people were sent. So you see again that Yosef was sending them in the daytime. He was telling them to arrive in the nighttime, but he was also telling them, please be careful if you're hustling to get here while it's still daytime. Make sure you don't hurt yourself or injure yourself with psiya gasa, with this excessively wide step. Now, where does this concept of psiagasa, of walking with a wide step? So there's a few different ideas that we find sprinkled throughout the Gemara, where a concept of a person walking very, very quickly or with very, very wide steps illustrates an element of arrogance. So also we're told a person is not supposed to walk b'koma zekufa, with a very straight back. They're not supposed to walk with a good posture, with their chest puffed out, with an arrogant stance. Because when a person on a physical level is acting in that way, it becomes part of the way that they feel on a mental, on emotional, and a spiritual plane. Now what's fascinating is that today we have social psychologists telling us that if a person walks into an interview, you will read this in actual business books. Before you walk into an interview, they tell you that there's a method, it's called the hook method, where you imagine that a hook is hooked into the top of your back, and it's attached to the ceiling, and you walk into the meeting almost like this, like you're hanging by the hook. So they're teaching you that air of confidence, and they're expressing to you that if you do something, even if you feel nervous or you're feeling upset or worried, if you walk in with that physical persona, that in and of itself is enough to be able to take it and create an effect on your mental, on your emotional, and on your intellectual states. So what Chazal are telling us here is this concept so many thousands of years ago, that the physical state of a person actually impacts their inner mindset and their inner self. There have been massive studies in the study of positive psychology that teach that when a person smiles, even if the smile is fake, there's a release of dopamine in the brain, and just the muscle structure that it takes to make a smile actually already starts to put a person in a better mood. Wild. So the Chachamim are plugging into that, and what are they saying? They're saying that the light that exists in a person's eyes, what is that light? Excuse me, honey. You can't play when I'm teaching. If you want to sit nicely, you can. We can't play games, okay? So when a person is walking with that arrogance and running almost carefree, like they're not worried about anything in the world, they're not hesitant, they're not cautious. You know when they say, watch your step, when a person is running, so to speak, through life, that diminishes an element of the light in his eyes. The light in a person's eyes is a euphemism. Whenever we talk about light, what are we always talking about? Light always represents wisdom. Ki ner mitzvah v'torah or. And we know there's a deep association between the understanding of wisdom and a person's humility. If you're arrogant, you're never learning. So the Torah, the Gemara is already extending and expressing that when a person undergoes a physical state of rushing through, of being carefree, I don't need to worry about anything, right? In that state, a 500th of his eyesight is diminished.
Interesting. There's what connects it to the eyesight?
We're referring to wisdom over here. In this understanding of the Gemara, it's referring to wisdom. It doesn't mean that the person can't physically see.
Not peripheral vision.
Not peripheral vision, no, none of that. Okay, let's carry on. Okay. Where are we? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Hiya. If you're following in the art scroll, you want to turn the page. Okay? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Hiya. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Hiya, Hamahalech baderech, someone who's traveling on the road, Al yochal yoter mishnei avon. He should eat sparingly. Eat like you would in a year or in a time of famine. Maitama, how come? Hacha targimu mishum ma'ayana. Over here, in the area where the Gemara was written, they explained the reason is because of ma'ayana, because of the person's his stomach, his gastroenterology. B'ma'arava, in the west, in Eretz Israel, when the Gemara over there explained that the reason why a person should eat sparingly when they're traveling is mishum mizone, because of the amount of food that a person has. Because remember, today, generally, if you get on a journey, you know when you're going to take off, and you know when you're going to arrive, unless of course you're flying Spirit. Other than that, though, if there's a time you're supposed to leave, there's a time you're supposed to land, you know how much food do you need in order to get from here to Florida. It's not going to be a lot. But back then, You could stop once because of a storm for 3 days, and stop a second time until the road dries up. Stop a second time because there's bandits. You can stop a third time because now you don't have enough people to go on the caravan, so they can't afford the protection that they need in order to travel through the dangerous roads and passageways. So travel was an arduous thing. So if you're packing food, says the Gemara, you would never know how you should be able to react to that. Now, you should remember one thing that we spoke about earlier. If you remember, we spoke earlier on in this Gemara about a difference between the people in the east and the people in the west. The people in Eretz Israel versus the people of Bavel. Where was Israel? Israel was high. Where was Bavel? Bavel was low. Bavel always had an excess of water. So in Bavel, they weren't worried about bringing extra food because they had an abundance of it. In Eretz Israel, where they were relying on the rain, and if the rains weren't coming because the people weren't doing what they were supposed to do, a person couldn't bring an inordinate amount of food with them. So why do we say in Bavel, because of your stomach, because of a difficulty, it's because they had a lot to eat. Their diet was richer. Gout.
I said that before. And another.
Yes, that's why I'm bringing it back over here. So the Gemara doesn't say it over here, but they're expecting you to remember that there's a difference between the climate of Bavel and the climate of Eretz Israel, and therefore it plays also into why they were acting in different ways. It's also interesting, by the way, that I've noticed that we definitely go, according to the opinion of Bavel, every time I eat a little too much on that plane, Shema Yisrael, you feel sick as a dog. So you might think that has to do only with the fact that it's plane food, but I've noticed, even if I bring my own food on the plane, you eat just a little bit too much, you push yourself that little bit extra. If I'm not careful, you just feel like you're Mishum, like Gemara says, Mishum Me'aina. Okay, so we have two reasons for why a person is traveling. Now, I love the idea that the Gemara is teaching you not just the laws of how a person should act and behave in terms of spirituality, but also smart, life messages and lessons. How do you travel?
Planning.
How are you going to travel with food? You're going to run out of food. Is there going to be a problem with your stomach when you get there? The Gemara continues. Okay, so now you've told me these two different opinions between the East and the West. The Gemara asks, what's the difference between these two opinions? One of them said because of the stomach, the intestines. One of them said because of the amount of food. My binayu, what's the difference between these two opinions? Has to be there's a difference between them, because if they were the same, we wouldn't recount both of them, especially because it's not a halakhic issue. Ika binayu, the difference between them, the Gemara says, diyativ be'arba. If a person who's traveling on a ship or on a boat, okay? So in such a scenario, we're not necessarily worried about the stomach of the person, because you're not experiencing the arduous nature of traveling on a horse, of walking a great distance. You're sitting and you're on the same spot in a chair for a week on end. So you might run out if the journey takes longer and the winds are not in your favor. But you're not going to have the other issue of your stomach killing. So therefore, the people of Eretz Israel, they did not have the problem when they talked about the people of Bavel. If they were traveling by boat, they didn't have this lesson that they taught the people not to eat food as if they were living in a famine. Inani, the Gemara brings another possible difference between these two opinions. The ka'azil me'avna la'avna. When someone is going from one inn to another, he has a Travelocity. He's got that. Remember we used to do this? You printed out your Google Maps route, right? You had stop A, stop B.
I used to do AAA triptychs.
Triptychs or MapQuest was big in the day. So you know what? You're going from Motel 6 to Knights Inn to Embassy Suites. You have it charted out. You know exactly where you're going to stay each time. So you're not going to have a problem of running out of food because you could replenish the food, but you're still in travel mode where this person's stomach and their digestive system is being taxed by the difficulty of travel. So in that case, someone who was coming with the reason of the Babylonians, which was about the stomach, he would eat less. But a person who was coming from the West, who they taught that the problem was really about rationing food, those people actually would not have this issue, and the rationers would not need to ration. The Gemara now continues and actually brings an example that's connected to this specific part of the Gemara. Gemara says, Rav Papa, kol parsa uparsa, achil chada rifta. Rav Papa, every time when he was traveling, he would eat one piece of bread, okay, every parsa. So how much is a parsa? A parsa, I believe, is 4 meal. Is that correct? Yeah, I think that's what we were told earlier. So what is 4 meal? A meal, I think, is a little bit less than a mile. Okay? So if you're talking about something akin to 4 miles of travel, so let's just imagine that Rav Papa is traveling the equivalent of, let's say, an hour and a half. You'd eat every hour and a half, you eat a slice of bread. Okay? 4 meal, approximately between 2.3 and 2.9 miles. Okay? So the if you're trying to go with the
This
easier
is a loaf of bread.
yeah, but again, rifta, it doesn't. What does a loaf mean? It means a roll. It doesn't give you the amount or the size. Okay. Now I'm going to come back to this in just a minute. I'm going to come back to this in just a minute to Rav Papa, specifically who Rav Papa is. Okay, because that's going to actually factor in to whether or not it's a piece of bread or a loaf of bread. Okay. Now, the Gemara says, okay. Since that's the case, kasavar, if he ate that much, where he's eating, even if it's a slice of bread, every, 2.9 miles, 3 miles, every hour he's eating a slice of bread, that's a fair amount of food. Kasavar mishum ma'ina, he held, Rav Papa, where was he from? He hailed from Bavel. And since he held, the reason was ma'ina, because of the digestive system, he did not have a problem because Rav Papa was actually very fat. He was a very fat man. So therefore, he was someone that was constantly eating. So he knew that the most healthy part of his body was his stomach muscles and his intestines. That was the part of the body that got the most workout because he was a heavy eater. So he was not worried about this thing. Now, the Gemara continues. The Gemara says as follows. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Yehuda said the name of Rav. Kol amar ivatzmo b'shnei re'avon. A person who limits his food intake, he starves himself, yani. B'shnei re'avon, in the years of famine, nitzom mitan mishuna. He is saved from a very difficult and painful death. Shnei amar, like the pasuk says, bira'av, in a time of starvation, padecha mimavet. Hakadosh Baruch Hu, he saved you from death. Mira'av mibayale. It should have said that Hashem saved you from the time of starvation, from the famine. What does it say? Bira'av, in the famine. That means that there's something that a person can do during the time of famine that will achieve salvation for him from God. And what is that? When a person is eating less during that time. Why would that be the case? What is it trying to say? B'shnei re'avon, in a time of starvation, right? The merit of the fact that he starved himself during the times of starvation, of famine. Now, why is that something worthy of praise? You starved yourself during the time of starvation? And the answer is, what we're referring to here is someone that actually had a choice. A guy who doesn't have a choice, he's starving like everybody else, there's nothing special about it. The point is, when someone actually has the ability to eat a lot, but because everyone else is starving, he feels, how could I be sitting here in my house eating like a pig when everyone else is suffering? So he eats like everyone else is eating. He's feeling the pain of the people. Someone who does that, he merits a salvation, a protection, memita, mishuna, from a difficult death. I just want to relate to you one amazing story like this. There was a time in Brisk. Brisk was a very famous and studious city in Europe. And the rabbi at the time, his name was Rav Chaim. Rav Chaim from Brisk, very famous. But he was famous for being an amazing academic with a tremendously analytical mind. His methodology in study is very rigorous. It's tearing everything apart to really understand things on a very, very deep level, okay? Now, even though he was known and famed for his wisdom, and most people who are intensely intellectual are often not so connected, on a social level. They usually, their head is more in the books than with the people. Rav Chaim was different, and actually on his tombstone, the first thing it says, if you go in Warsaw, I've seen it myself many times, it says, Rav HaChesed. He was a master, he was a rabbi in chesed, in kindness. There was a massive fire in his town in Brisk, and many of the houses burnt down. One of the only houses that didn't burn down in the whole town was the house of Rav Chaim. So all the people, where did they go? They went from their houses. Where did they sleep? They went to the synagogue. Because the synagogues back then, they were built out of stone. Because they'd learned over the years in Europe that when the Cossacks or when the Crusaders or when whomever rides through the town and they had all these thatched huts, all they did was they threw torches. In 10 seconds, they burned everyone alive. So they had one building in town that they could run to, which wasn't, you couldn't burn it down. It also was acted like almost like a mini fortress. And the Jews would pack inside and lock the doors, and that's how they would try and save themselves. So all the Jews, where they living, they all moved into the shul. Rav Chaim already at that time was an old man. The family, they come, they tell him the news. They see him 2 minutes later, he's got a pillow and a blanket, and he's walking towards the shul. I said, what are you doing? He said, how could it be that all of my people are sleeping on the floor and on the benches in the synagogue, and I should be sleeping in a bed? Impossible. I'm going to sleep in the synagogue. Slowly but surely, people started rebuilding their houses and going home. Rav Chaim would not leave the shul until the very last person in the shul had found himself back in his house, and then Rav Chaim could go back to his own bed. Remarkable. But that's exactly the lesson we're learning in this Gemara, that a person who starves himself during a time of starvation, he experiences mitah mishunah. Now we're going to learn some interesting halachot that are a follow-on specifically from this idea, the concept of feeling someone else's pain. Amar Resh Lakish taught, Asur la'adam l'shamesh mitato b'shnei re'avon. And if there's a time of terrible famine, of terrible scarcity of food, people are starving, a person is not allowed to have marital relations with his wife. Why? Shne'emar, Ul Yosef yulad shnei banim. Yosef was born to him 2 sons. B'terem tavo shnat ha'ra'av. Before the years of famine came to Egypt. What is that telling you? That's telling you that Yosef, when the years of famine came, he stopped having children. He was no longer together with his wife because he felt, how could I sit here and have the enjoyment and the pleasure of marital relations, of intimacy, when everyone else out there is starving and is having such a terrible difficulty. Now the Gemara says, hold up, 1 second. Tana, chasuche banim, if someone does not have children, they are allowed to have marital relations even during a time of famine, a time of suffering. Why? Because there's a mitzvah at that point to do pru urvu, to have children, and therefore that supersedes the idea of taking part in someone else's feeling solidarity with someone else. If a person's not yet had children, then he's supposed to try and have children, even though it's a time of famine. The Gemara continues, in the name of the Braita, Tanu Rabbanan. The Gemara, the rabbis taught us, Bizman Yisrael Shuyim B'tzar, in a time when the Jewish people are living in a pain, they're living with difficulty, okay? Upiresh echad mehem, and one of them, he left everybody, and he does not want to feel, he doesn't want to be, in the azab with everybody else. Ba'in shnei malachei hasharet, 2 angels come along, shemelavin lo la'adam, that normally accompany a person, umanichin lo yedehen al rosho, and the angels place their hand on his head, and what do they say? Ve'omrim, Peloni zeh, this guy, okay, Peloni is just an expression like John Doe. Peloni zeh, this guy, shepiresh min hasibur, that he left the community, al yir'eh b'nehamat tzibur. He will not see in the comforting of the tzibur. Why? Since he wasn't with them in the worst of times, he also doesn't get to be with them for the best of times. The angels are basically issuing a curse on someone who's living it up, separates himself from the community.
Like COVID, people
during.
bailing to Florida for the month. Lockdown.
By the way, I'm not sure if that's an accurate representation of people also traveling for their own safety, but the feelings that New Yorkers who stayed felt towards everybody else, this is why. They're like, we're here suffering. You're out there, what, because you have the extra money to go fly, so you're just going to leave us? We thought you were one of us. And then afterwards, they're like, we don't need you back. Like, you remember all that ridiculousness, okay? De Blasio. Okay, let's move on. Now, there's something very special here. in this concept, and I want to share with you where we learn actually this idea from. If you remember, we read on Shavuot, we read Megillat Ruth, and in Megillat Ruth we read about the fact it was in the days of the Shefot HaShoftim, the days of the judging of the judges. There's a guy, and his name is Avimelech, okay? Elimelech. Elimelech is married to Naomi. He has two sons, Machlon and Chilion, two sons. The two sons marry who? Ruth and Orpah. They move away from the Jewish people, because it was a time of starvation, of famine, and they move to Moab, to a non-Jewish neighborhood. Our rabbis tell us why, because he was very wealthy, and he all the time had people coming knocking on his door. He wouldn't want to share what he had. He said, had you already with the knocking at the door? I'm out. He moves to Moab. He dies. Machlon, his son, dies. Chilion, his other son, dies. Ruth only has children because she then moves back with Naomi to Eretz Israel. And what happens? She marries Boaz. But it's wild. The man's entire family is wiped off the face of the earth. Even Naomi, his wife, we don't read that she gets remarried.
What could this be?
So literally, they go from top of the pack to the point where they have so little food to eat that Naomi is sending her daughter-in-law Ruth, HaMoaviyah, she's like, go get us some food, some scraps from the field. So when someone is not with the tzibur in their time of suffering, the angels come and they say, you don't merit to be with the people when things turn around, when things get better. Fascinating, we find an exact concept of this as well. We say by the time of Tisha B'Av, we say, Kol ha'mita'abel al Yerushalayim, anyone who mourns for Jerusalem, Zocheh v'ro'eh b'binyana. He will merit to see when it gets rebuilt. Meaning, if you're not mourning when everyone else is mourning, you don't get to see the rebuilding process. So this idea, it repeats itself in many, many, many different iterations. Last example before we move on. There's a halakha that a person, let's say it's a fast day, and everyone's fasting. And I, for whatever reason, I don't have an obligation to fast. The halakha is, even though I'm allowed to eat, I don't eat whatever I want. I eat simple foods. So let's say I don't have an obligation, for whatever reason. I don't go and eat, the doctor told me I have to eat. That doctor did not tell you have to order a Côte de Boeuf steak from Reserve Cut. He never told you that. So don't order that. Don't give the children that you're going to give food. What do we tell you to give them? Don't give them sweets. Because we want to drill this idea in. Even if you're not obligated to fast, even if you don't have to fast, if everyone else is suffering, how could you not feel the suffering of the people? Yes?
Didn't we see that when we said when the person traveled from place A that was fasting for rain and not for rain, if he goes home and the place where he left was not fasting and he goes to the place that was fasting, he shouldn't show up?
Oh, yes, very similar. So he should not show them that he's not fasting. Exactly. Okay, let's move on. Perfect memory, Jonah. Hazar Baruch. Refuah Shlema from your COVID. Let's continue.
Thank you.
Tanya Idach. But I remember reading this Gemara and I was shaking. Because normally, when you associate someone putting their hand like this on the head, you're getting a beracha. Yivarecha Hashem Yishmerecha. I never heard that someone should put their hands on your head and say, Bakastrak, I'm going to chop off your head, you're going to die as soon as possible. Right? It's right? Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
The Malachim put their hands on his head and they say he should not merit to have the redemption.
That's a bit chumps.
It's right? Isn't that harsh?
Oof.
Okay. Like, it's like, you want to curse me? Curse me from far away. Don't put your hands on my head. Okay, fine. Tanya Idach. The Gemara brings another braita. Bizman she'tzibur sharui batzar. In a time when the tzibur is resting in a difficult time, al yom ha'adam, person should not say, Elech lebeti, I'm going to go to my house, ve'ochal ve'eshteh, I'll eat and I'll drink. Ve'shalom alayich nafshi, and everything's good with me. V'moseken, person does that, alav ha'katuv omer, on him the person says, ve'hineh sason ve'simcha, and behold, every time you see the word ve'hineh means, what's going on here? Like, remember, Yaakov, he thinks he marries Rachel. Pasuk says, and it was the morning, Vehine, behold, it was Leah. Vehine always indicates something that you're surprised to see. Vehine, and behold, Sason v'simcha.
Like suddenly.
Harog bakar v'shahot tzon. where killing of the cattle and the slaughtering of the sheep. Ochel basar v'shatot yain. Eat meat, and drink wine. Achol v'shato, eat and drink, ki machar namut, for tomorrow we die. I took the Chevy to the levee because the levee was dry, and good old boys are drinking whiskey and it's singing, this will be the day that I die. Literally the pasuk.
It's the Last Supper. Wow.
Right? Isn't that wild?
That's a rough one.
Ki machar namut. So what exactly are we learning from here? What is this? What are we seeing from here? That behold, there's rejoicing and happiness. Harog bakar v'shachotzon. They're getting the shawarma ready. Achol basar v'shtot yain. Achol v'shato. Go ahead, eat, drink. Ki machar namut.
Never
For tomorrow.
abandon the boys.
Yes. Maktiv batre, what does it say? Right after a person who says, this devil may care attitude. I'm going to have what I want. I don't care. The pasuk says right after this, V'nigla be'oznai Hashem tzvakot, and Hashem appeared into my ear, so to speak. Hashem revealed himself to me. Im yichupar avon hazeh lachem ad timutun. I will never forgive you for this sin. Ad timutun, until you die. Harsh language. A person always has to be with the tzibur. Al tifrosh min ha-tzibur. So we're familiar with this idea. Don't separate from the community with regards to minhagim. With regards to, everyone's doing something, you also got to do it. Al tifrosh min ha-tzibur. But here, it's a whole different ballgame. Everyone's suffering, you're doing very well. Don't run around having the time of your life just because you can. Feel a little bit what people are going through. Feel the tsar. Minimize, cut back, do something to illustrate that you're with them. In fact, God himself never asks us to do something he doesn't do himself. The pasuk says that when God appeared to Moshe, he appeared in the thorn bush. What was the point of appearing in the thorn bush?
He's suffering with us.
Right? Excellent. Because imo anochi b'tzara. You're suffering, I'm suffering. I'm with you. So God asks us to do what he does himself. The Gemara, quoting the Braita, now carries on. Ad kan midat benonim. All this that we're talking about, this is how a regular guy acts. Okay? Ava b'midat reshaim. When we're talking about someone who's evil, maktiv, what does it say? Etayu ekchayain. Come with me. I'm going to take wine. V'nizbe'ah shechar, and we're going to have loads and loads of intoxicating beverages. Ve'aya kazeh yom machar, and tomorrow we're going to do even more. Whatever we're going to drink today, we're going to have more tomorrow. Maktiv batre, what does it say afterwards? Hasadik avad. The Sadiq, he passed away. Ve'en ish sam alev, and there's no person that's placing it on his heart, that it is because of the evil the righteous man was taken away. So what is the Gemara telling us over here? Anyone can figure this out?
It was 45 minutes then. And then before that, when I got home, when I started working on it, it took me 15
I have a theory, but
Let me hear. What do you think?
just talking about these.
There's two ways of understanding this Gemara.
These
Okay?
people that have ga'ava, they don't believe in the prophecy, they don't believe in Hashem, and they keep spitting in his face by drinking and celebrating and this and that. And the good guy, Hashem wants to take him out of the picture. He kills him before he sees the total annihilation.
So how does that relate back to the Rishaim? So we started by saying that the Benonim, at least the Benonim said, they recognized Mahar Namut, like, we're done. They understood their own mortality.
Well, they believed in the fact
The Rishaim are like, you know what? You know what's tomorrow? Tomorrow is not tomorrow we die. Tomorrow is double the party. Right?
there's zero faith, zero belief.
But I would have expected, so you know what it should say after that? Hashem's like, oh boy. Those other guys, I killed them, but forget about it. You guys,
So the good
Slow
people,
death.
Good people didn't have to suffer afterwards.
So again, that's the punishment for the wicked people.
They have to suffer now. They have to now.
Maybe
Wicked
give
people
them a
don't
chance to
necessarily
see the
get
light.
punished right
also.
away, right?
So again, we took a left turn here.
This is Batya's?
1 second.
Yeah.
The more wicked people, what does the pasuk say about them? That the Sadiq dies early. What?
So,
There's no chance of redemption?
no, so
What do you mean by that?
Sadiq died. He didn't have to
is
suffer. He just died. Now the Rishaim are there, and they now have to go through maybe a long suffering. You know?
Why?
Because they
That's their
didn't believe.
punishment.
So what does that have to do with the Sadiq?
The Sadiq was their only hope for redemption.
There you go. See? The only way out for someone who's in that deep is that they have people to turn them around. Hashem says, if you're wicked, if you're regular wicked, you're just gonna take you guys. But the Sadiq will be there to turn things around. But you know what? I'll arrange. If you guys are wicked enough, I'll arrange that there is no Sadiq left for you to be able to turn. Where do you find this in the Torah? Sodom, Lot. Abraham is like, you can't destroy Sodom. Sodom is the most wicked people. And what does Abraham say? No, I'm going to find a Sadiq. Hashem's like, no problem. Yeah, if there's 10 Sadiqim, you got it. There's 50 Sadiqim, 30 Sadiqim. Even if there's 10 Sadiqim, no problem. There's not 10 Sadiqim. Why is it not 10 Sadiqim? Hashem made sure there's no Sadiqim. Got it?
Got it.
Okay. The Braita carries on. We're almost done with our time, so this will be the last piece. Ella, so what should a person do? That's what a person should not do. Okay? Before we move on, I just want to point out one difference. The Rasha and the Benoni are doing the same thing. What makes one a Rasha and one a Benoni?
Arrogance.
Oh, this is so important. You got that? He's on fire, man.
Just turn the camera around.
I gotta do dual vision. You guys got that? They're both eating meat and drinking wine. They're both ignoring the people. The only difference is one guy says, "Let's just eat, drink. Tomorrow we're dead anyway. Hashem's gonna get us. We're done. We were deserving a punishment." The guy who says nothing's coming for me. That's the ultimate wickedness, right? Why? Because at least same way that the redeeming factor of a true Rasha is that he has a tzaddik to maybe pray for him, to maybe teach him, the redeeming factor for a Benoni is the feelings of fear, of Yirat Shamayim that he has. What's going to happen if? You get rid of that feeling, the lack of any kind of care or concern in the world tells me, you know what? A lot of times we feel like, you know what? I want to do things right. I want the berachat to be here. I kind of feel like if I trample on that guy to get the job done, there won't be any berachat. That's not the way to get berachat. That means that we're thinking in that manner, that we're thinking about what tomorrow will bring from today's deeds. So sometimes what can be the difference between a Rasha and a Benoni is not the actions that they have, but the feelings that they have about the actions that they did. It's a wild and understanding about the profundity of the Jewish appreciation for a person's psychological state, for a person's emotional state towards the way that they are living. Ella, what should a person do on the positive side? Yitza'er Adam im hatzibur. A person should feel suffering along with the community. Shken matzina Moshe Rabbeinu, we found by Moshe, shetzi'er atzmo im hatzibur, he also suffered along with the people. Shnei Amar, v'idei Moshe kebedim, and the hands of Moshe were very heavy. V'yikchu even ve'asimu tachtav ve'yeshev aleh. They took a stone and they put it under him, and he sat down on it. What is it? What are we talking about over here? The Moshe Rabbeinu hand stone. When the people are fighting against Amalek, Moshe goes up the mountain and he's lifting his hands up to the heavens to pray to God. And as long as his hands are up, they're winning the war. His hands come down, they lose. The tide of the war turns. Eventually, he gets Aaron and Hur to raise his hands. But the pasuk says his hands got so heavy, it was so difficult to do, he had to sit down. And the pasuk says, what did he do? He sat down. They took a stone and they put underneath it. The Gemara asks, come on, וכי לא היה למשה כר אחת או כסות אחת. Did he not have one pillow? Did he not have one blanket? לשב עליה, to sit on it, that he needs to sit on a rock? The Gemara says, הואיל אלא, only ככה, Moshe said, הואיל בישראל שירים בצער, they're in the middle of a war, אף אני אהיה עמהם בצער. Don't bring me the cushion, let me sit on the rock.
The captain
Wild.
always goes down with the ship.
But what's wild here is the captain,
Empathy.
he isn't on the ship. Imagine the captain is on the shore. He happens to be on the shore and the ship's going down. And he gets off of his chair and he sits on the floor because the people in the boat are in trouble.
Great lesson.
A wild idea. But you find these ideas again and again and again and again and again by the great tzaddikim that lived before us. And anyone who suffers, who causes himself suffering with the tzibur, zocheh v'ro'eh v'nechemat tzibur. Here's the flip side, the positive upside of those angels. If I cause myself to suffer with the tzibur, I merit and I get to see nechemat tzibur, the comforting of the tzibur, when the time comes. Shema yomar adam. What if maybe a person says, "Mi me'id bi"? You know, who's gonna let anybody know if I suffered with the people? How are they gonna know if I was having, my delicious food, or if I was, engaging in marital relations, or if I was sleeping on my comfortable pillows and blankets when everyone else was dying? Who's gonna know? Avnei beito shel adam ve'korot beito shel adam me'idim bo. The bricks of your house, the beams of your home, me'idim bo, they testify against you. I think this is the reason why initially they stopped having exposed beams and brick. People were terrified. Shneimar, as it says. That's a good contracted joke right there. Next time your architecture buddies are gathered around, you can. Well, we learned the Gemara, and the rabbi made an architectural joke. Okay, Shneimar, super niche. Shneimar, as it says, Ki even mikir tizak, for a stone from the wall will shout. V'kafis me'etz yanena, and the piece, the kafis me'etz, the stone-shaped element that was made out of wood, Ya'anena will answer, so to speak. Ukefis me'etz Ya'anena, and the stone in the wood will answer up and will say exactly what the person did in the privacy of your own home. So if you thought that the NSA was watching, they have nothing on you as compared to the beams and the bricks and stones in your own home, which will testify in the end of days to what it is that you did and what it is that you did not do. I'm fond of saying over, we will end with this, the Rabbeinu Bahye. Rabbeinu Bahye says that there was a custom amongst the great tzaddikim in France that when the time would come at the end of their life, they would ask to be buried in the table, their dining room tables. The table that had witnessed all the guests that they had, all the Shabbat meals, all the chesed that they did in inviting poor people to the house. They turned the dining room table into their own coffin, so that the wood of the house would come with them as a witness to Shamayim, to say how they ate, how they behaved, how they made berachot. Be'ezat Hashem, we should be zocher to be tzaddikim in public, but also we should be zocher to be tzaddikim in private. Baruch Adonai Le'olam.